Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We've been doing this short series on how to love yourself from the perspective of every single personality type. This week, we're talking about the ISFP personality type. Last week, we talked about INTPs. And this week, we're going to turn to the ISFP and talk a little about you, if you're an ISFP, how you can show your self-love with the framework of your personality type as a tool to do so. And also, if you're not an ISFP, this is going to be a great journey of you to see the ISFP mind, personality, and how they can show themselves love. And we're going to also extract something here in this episode for all of the other 15 types. What can we learn about self-love from ISFPs? What can we take away from this personality type's attunement to themselves and an understanding that we can apply to us?
Yeah, we've been using a specific framework predicated on the concept that if we can fall in love with our personality type, sometimes it's a little easier to fall in love with ourselves. I'm not sure why we have this value or virtue around denying self-love, right? Like not loving ourselves, like that's somehow a higher order is to beat ourselves up and think we're terrible people.
Yeah.
And one of the avenues or one of the techniques that I've found for falling in love with ourselves is to fall in love with our personality type, to understand that, to kind of get how cool it is, and then go, well, if I can fall in love with that personality type, I can certainly fall in love with myself because I come pre-wired with those preferences. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a trick that we do on ourselves, right? Like if I can sort of go 1 degree of separation from type and go, ooh, ISFPs are like super cool. In fact, they might be the coolest of all the types. Oh, I'm an ISFP. And then bring all of that gratitude and appreciation for the type, bring it into the self.
Yeah. And if you've been in a relationship with somebody else, which I think all of us have at least been in a friendship or family relationship, but even a romantic relationship, the idea is that love is freely given. And we come from that perspective that if you're in a relationship with somebody and they require you to meet certain criteria before they'll show you love, well, is that really a loving relationship? That's contingent on some demonstration or some action. It's not really, it's not unconditional love.
Right.
But what we're talking about is unconditional love. And just like in a relationship, you would send that to somebody unconditionally, you would want to send love to yourself unconditionally as well. Now, in relationships, though, we do know there are expectations we have. There are certain boundaries, certain agreements, whether they're spoken or unspoken, promises are made. You have those with yourself as well. So there's expectations we have with ourselves. We have certain self-promises, certain agreements we've made to ourselves. And it's on those channels, those relational channels, that love is sent and received. So there is a way to look at our personality type and put things in a proper expectation, because there are parts of our personality that are stronger and there's parts of our personality that are more challenged. They're a little weaker to us. We're a little more uncertain around them.
Yeah. And
so are you properly, and the positing or the question is here in this series and this episode specifically, as an ISFP, do you have the right expectations for the parts of your personality that are showing up? And are you putting too much requirements on parts of yourself to show up before you'll send yourself love? That's really the question.
Yeah.
And removing the obstacles to that.
Yeah, exactly. The premise that you're referring to is love isn't earned, but a good relationship is. So we are always trying to send ourselves signals of love because we love ourselves. We're sort of evolutionarily wired to love ourselves. Otherwise, we'd all be committing suicide all the time.
Yeah.
So we do love ourselves. But do we receive love from ourselves? Meaning that, do we have a bunch of obstructions that we've placed between us sending ourselves goodwill, sending ourselves good things? What are all of the obstructions that we've placed for our before we'll allow ourselves to feel it? And as we've mentioned in previous episodes, there's like tons of reasons why we set up those obstructions. There's tons of them. And in this case, what we're going to do is use type to at least remove some of those obstructions to make sure that, as you mentioned, in any relationship, we're setting reasonable expectations. We give ourselves love freely, and then we make sure to build a good relationship with ourselves by setting good, healthy expectations and then receiving the love that we're sending.
Yeah. Okay. Quick point of orientation, just in case you're new or you haven't been listening for a while. We're going to tune into the Personality Hacker Car Model for the ISFP. Now, the Car Model comes from our ISFP Owner's Manual. It's a program for ISFPs to learn all about their personality type and not just learn about their type, but make real world changes in their life to get on their mission. You know, it's usually around relationships, careers, or identity. We have challenges, And the owner's manual tunes into that for the ISFP. In the owner's manual, though, there's a portion talking about your specific mental wiring as an ISFP. We call this a car model. It's a metaphor of a car. You have a driver, co-pilot in the backseat. You got some kids, a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old sitting in the backseat. I'll just go really quickly through it just to orientate you. You should go and look at the car model at personalityhacker.com if you want to learn more about that. Obviously, in the owner's manual itself for ISFPs. But quickly, as a cursory, I guess a map legend, if you will. The driver for ISFPs is a mental process called authenticity. That's our nickname for it. Its technical name is introverted feeling. It's all about the identity of someone, the motivations, what resonates, what is part of the core values, and who I am. And it's very expressive. The co-pilot for ISFPs is a mental process we've nicknamed sensation. Technical name is extroverted sensing. It's all about the present moment, the here and now, the single perspective. What is happening right now? What can I touch, taste, smell, and experience in the moment? Right behind that is that 10-year-old I talked about in the back seat. For an ISFP, it's a process that we've nicknamed perspectives. Technical name, introverted intuition. It's about changing and looking at things from different perspectives, taking on other people's perspective, projecting into the future, and applying meaning and archetypes to your world in an imaginative way. By the way, these all do a lot more than I'm saying. This is just a quick cursory overview. Right behind the driver is on the left side of that car in that quadrant is a 3-year-old mental process we've nicknamed effectiveness. Technical name, extroverted thinking. It's about getting the job done. Metrics, measurements, timelines, accomplishments, tasks, and projects, and resource management. And that, for an ISFP, has about the maturity or certainty level of a 3-year-old child in a metaphorical way. So this is the snapshot of the ISFP personality, the mental wiring, or what's technically called their cognitive function stack. We're going to use this as a tool to see what are the proper expectations you should have for your personality type as an ISFP.
Yeah. And if you get an owner's manual, it goes way deeper into all that stuff. And so I highly recommend that if you're just brand spanking new to functions, go pick up one of those. It'll help you suss out the true meat from your personality type.
Yeah. You're doing this episode through a headache, aren't you?
I am.
You're showing up. I could kind of see your eyes are lidded. You're like, I'm going to do this anyway. I am here and I'm gonna make this happen, Joel.
Yeah, I am. I'm glad you said something because I was hoping that if it was noticeable, then it wouldn't be a mystery as to why I'm like grimacing or look heavy lidded.
So if you're an ISFP and you're going to listen to this and you find an avenue for self-love, just know this was hard won. Antonia muscled through a headache on your behalf so you could find an avenue for self-love.
Well, it's one of those headaches that I woke up with. And
I hate those. Those are the worst.
I know. Sometimes they get better as the day goes on, but sometimes they get worse. And it looks like this is one of those that's getting worse as the day goes on. So hopefully by the end of the episode, I'll be, my goal is to be cogent throughout the entire episode. So we'll see. We'll see if I hit it.
I don't want you to nominalize this headache and name it Joel or something. If
it's already done. Sorry.
Oh, no.
It's already been labeled.
Right. Fair enough. All right. So I'll go easy on you. Let's get into some of what we're going to talk about today. How do we start talking about the proper expectations of self-love for ISFPs?
Okay. So the ideal is that the stronger, more accessible, more certain, more talented aspects of ourselves, that we set high expectations for them.
Yeah.
That we don't go easy on ourselves, that we don't let ourselves off the hook. We don't just skate by on talent, that we build legitimate skill. And the relationship this has to self-love is our inner wisdom knows when we're being lazy. It knows when we have more inside of us, when we're leaving money on the table. And if we don't squeeze all the juice from our strongest the strongest aspects of ourselves, I do think our inner wisdom, like sort of our inner whole self, I think it gets a little disappointed. It knows that there's more. It knows that that it's capable of more. And I think everybody has this sense inside of themselves that they want to be the most themselves they can be in a single lifetime.
Yeah.
They want to be the best they can be. And so if we skate on talent, when it comes to particularly our driver function, but also our co-pilot, if we're just skating on talent, we're not going to, that's actually creates an obstruction to feeling self-love.
Yeah.
We put up the barrier of, I don't know, kind of like almost like laziness.
Yeah.
Like we know there's more in us that we can bring out.
So what I hear you saying is if I'm looking at my car model of personality for ISFPs, the two front, driver and co-pilot, I should have high expectations for those parts of me.
Yep.
Like it's proper to expect a lot. But the 10-year-old and 3-year-old, the backseat, I mean, it probably varies.
Well, I would say that we need to have reasonable expectations, not zero, not expect nothing, but to have reasonable expectations. If it is harder to manifest these parts of ourselves, if they are more uncertain, if we have an instinct or an inclination to dial them back or throttle them because we're afraid of other people's judgment, or that we don't think that we're going to show up very well, and then overcompensate by trying to prove that we're better at it than we fear we are, we're going to set ourselves up for either disappointment or worse, to be demoralized, to expect ourselves to be as good in our uncertain parts as we are in our highly certain parts. That's unreasonable. And so just like if we don't go hard, if we don't have high enough expectations in our strengths, we're going to be disappointed. If we have too high of expectations in our uncertain places, then we're going to experience demoralization. So it's about managing different expectations for the different parts of ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that driver, the front seat, driver, co-pilot. Let's zoom into the driver. Introverted feeling, authenticity. It's all about what resonates with a person, what the core values are, what motivates you. It's a very expressive part for ISFPs. This is the part of them that feels deeply. And it's really difficult for deep feelings, deep, complex feelings to be articulated precisely. Sometimes they have to be performed or expressed through art or literal performance, singing something. Usually ISFPs find themselves needing to express something using this function.
Yeah. So we're also going to tap into what our friend Dr. John Beebe calls the relationship to others and relationship to self aspect of his 8-function model. He calls the dominant and inferior, what we call the driver and the 3-year-old, the axis of relating to ourselves. So this is a function that almost doubles up on self relationship. Introverted feeling, like you mentioned, is about understanding the self. It's introspective in terms of observing how things are making it feel. What are its values, what's its identity, what it likes and dislikes, the crusades it finds itself on, like all of those things that are like, I'm a person, I'm here and I exist and I'm going to leave my thumbprint, right? I'm going to communicate what it means to experience the universe in this unique configuration. So it's already very self-reflective. And it's the strongest part of the axis of relating to self. And so the one's identity in this part, it's almost like the nth degree of that. It's like very much a self. I don't want to use the word relationship. It's like
Self-reference.
Very self-referenced, very in tuned to what's going on in the inner terrain, very attuned to one's experience, a human experience.
Yeah.
Very attuned to what is going on for the self. We talked about introverted thinking with INTPs as it being almost disconnected from the self. It's like kind of disassociated. This function is massively associated with self.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to have high expectations for that? What do you think it means to, you're somebody who has introverted feeling or authenticity. What does it mean to have high expectations for this? Not just have talent, but skill.
Well, I'll just say this. I know an ISFP who was a little frustrated at a fast food restaurant because it was understaffed. And the ISFP was feeling deeply like this was morally wrong in some way. And in order to get the point across, they started to disrupt and challenge the systems at this restaurant. In other words, they were making it difficult for the workers to do their job because the ISFP was frustrated that it was hard for them to order and do what they were as a customer. And I remember thinking and referring to this person saying, listen, you think that by slowing the process down, you're really making a statement to the people that work here that this should be done better. But you forget they're in the same position you're in. The employees that called out today, right? The employees that didn't come to work today called out, and now these people are here doing their job. They all did the right thing. And you, by gumming up the works, are punishing them for them coming to work and not calling out like their coworkers that caused this entire situation. So you're punishing the people doing the right thing, and the people that didn't do the right thing aren't feeling the consequences of this. And you think this is getting some kind of communication across. And the person stopped and they evaluated that, and then they immediately changed their behavior because they knew I was right. They were punishing people that it wasn't their fault. And what I was trying to reflect to this ISFP to do is to tune in and say, you're a half measure with this part of you, this driver. And we didn't even talk about type. I just reflected this to them. You're at a half measure. You're tuning into the self going, this is an awful experience. I don't like this. I feel bad about this. And I'm motivated to make a change. But all you did was create other people who are probably feeling very similar to you. You created a more challenge for them to do their job by gumming up the works, thinking you're communicating to some bigger system that this needs to be corrected for. But the moment they started to tune in, wait a minute, if I'm having this experience, this very personal experience, I bet this is more universal to other people too. And they started to empathize with the other people on the other side of the equation and realize, oh, what is personal to me is probably universal. Like it's probably personal to somebody else. And so I think this is an ISFP that has developed this part of themselves, this driver, and is tuned into that part going, wait, I can actually understand what's going on for other people and have empathy because I can really tune into myself and then say, that's probably what's happening for others. I think that's a mature, high expectation for this process for ISFPs. I think that's a good example of how it would look. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the capacity is, because I think some ISFPs, because it's so introspective and they lose sight of what's going on for others around them, they think they're the only one. Oh, I must be the only one being frustrated by this situation or having this challenge or experiencing this. No, you're not. A lot of people are. And in fact, tune into it deeper, go deeper into that feeling, because the deeper you get and the more personal you get, the more universal you'll find it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So this capacity to understand a bigger world through the individual experience, right? To understand what's happening for others, to understand that this is kind of how it works, right? It's not just me. It's everybody. Everybody's having these feelings. Everybody's having these experiences. And then being able to, as you mentioned, they were trying to communicate to some bigger system that something needed to change. It was almost like a little crusade they were on in that moment. Mm-hmm. And that was a misapplication of crusade.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just going to hurt people.
That's right. It was just going to be more frustrating. It was going to take a frustrating situation to make even more frustrating. So when an ISFP really like adds skill to talent, then when they choose their crusade, right? And it could be one big crusade, right? They could be like a missionary or an activist or somebody who works for a nonprofit or whatever it is, the thing that they've decided is very important to them. When they stretch this part of themselves and really capitalize on it and build skill, now they're more effective at both choosing crusades and then doing right action to further the thing along that they wanted to see, right? Yeah. They're not just quote unquote frustrating the service, the fast food workers. Maybe they take it to one level up, or maybe they now have higher awareness around this or whatever, it is that they would want to. Maybe they start their own restaurant, whatever it is that this has motivated them to do. They tap into the motivation and allow themselves to be motivated by things that are bigger picture, not just the self all the way inside.
Yeah. Or I think they can also create understanding for others. There's somebody in your world right now as an ISFP that hates a political entity, some political person, someone running for office.
Whoever they think is the other side of them.
And they probably have projected all this demonic, terrible things onto them, right? And it's like they're all bad, no good, right? 100%. As an ISFP, that part of you, that authenticity part of you is able to tune into people. Even maybe you're like, yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't like that person either that's running for office or whoever. But also say, but what is their motivation? Are they really getting up in the morning? This person that I don't like, are they kneeling on a satanic pentagram and conjuring up the devil to hurt the world and to hurt everybody that is going to be, in their experience? Or do they have motivations similar to other people too? Again, that whole personal universal thing. Do they have their own fears and own drives and own motivation? Yeah, I don't agree with them. I don't like them, but there's got to be more nuance than they're just a caricature of a bad person. They have to have other things going on. And I think that authenticity process can tune into those kinds of things and go, there's a lot more here than we broad brush and paint in our world. This is not a person is not a soundbite. They can't be reduced down to one single motivation, like a mustache twirling villain. Everybody's got this complexity in them. And so an ISFP that's tuned into that can help us all understand, no, that person's a complex person. And they can help us see that about people when this process is dialed in properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about themselves? That's the question. Can they do this for themselves? That's the thing that I think ISFPs struggle with.
Absolutely. So being in tune with and in touch with the humanity of like what I think that's what I meant by having a human experience. But I mean, it's like I guess the easier way of saying it is like understand that a human is complex and there's a lot to being a human.
Oh yeah.
And so keeping the humanity of an individual, I think, is a massive piece. And then I think also there was a note I had taken when I was kind of thinking about this episode about if your realm is emotions, if your realm is feelings, if your realm is like understanding how everything is impacting you, that could get pretty overwhelming pretty quick. Yeah. In fact, whenever I tune into that stuff, I get overwhelmed almost immediately, right? Even by really basic, simple emotions. Like they're very overwhelming to me. But if that's your terrain, if that's like the world you swim in, then stretching the capacity for all of this depth of understanding the self and not getting overwhelmed by it, to be able to deal with challenges, really challenging times with grace, to not throw temper tantrums, but to actually get through it and understand like this is like stretching one's capacity to experience intense emotion and have a form of grit and resilience that gets through that. I think that's another part of it, being able to handle a lot and then being able to sit with and handle the big emotions of other people as well.
Yeah.
To just be able to play in that space without it, washing over you or handing yourself over to it. Being influenced by your emotions and your feelings and the way that, the way that you're processing what it means to experience all of this, being impacted by it, influenced by it, but also influencing it, right? Setting the course of who you're becoming over time. And sometimes the acceptance that introverted feeling or authenticity has for the self, when it's only talent and not skill, sometimes that can calcify. Sometimes it can be like, well, this is who I am and I accept that and I validate it and other people need to as well. When this function is stretched into more skill, it goes, actually, I'm being changed by the world all the time. I'm constantly being changed. I watch myself become different iterations of myself constantly. So maybe I can direct that process. Maybe I can become better and better versions of myself. And it doesn't mean that I invalidated the earlier iterations or versions. It doesn't mean that I was bad and wrong when I was younger or a previous version of myself. It just means that I'm directing this to be more in alignment with my values. I'm directing who I am to be more in touch with and in tune with the things that are important to me and how I want to show up and manifest and express, not just allowing life to turn me into this person that I may or may not even like.
I would also say that ISFPs, because they have this authenticity process, this driver, I think that driver is tuned into self-love more than any other process. And the 8 functions, the Jungian cognitive functions that we use, introverted feeling is definitely focused on the self. And so I think it's a direct pathway for self-love. I think ISFPs have a little bit of an advantage on this. They can see themselves more directly than maybe the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, they're also more tuned into self-loathing as well.
Well,
and so, and having high expectations means you can't just hand yourself over to self-loathing. Yeah. Like that's part of the high expectations is I'm going to find a way to give and receive love to myself. And it's also a very self-validating function. That's a big part of it. So I totally agree. I think ISFPs having an advantage in here as long as they push themselves.
So then the expectation I would say for an ISFP is to be able to love yourself, even though you can see all the dark parts and all the challenging parts, because you have so much access to how you are. You can see all your negative motivations, all those motivations to hurt or harm or destroy or diminish. And you have to love those parts too. Mm-hmm. So the capacity here, I think, is high. And if you can find ways to love yourself, I think that can be tuned to other people.
Yep.
Now, speaking of our functions, we just talked about the driver. Let's talk about the co-pilot, extroverted sensing. We've nicknamed it sensation. This is a perceiving process, how you learn information as an ISFP. You move through the world, seeing things from a present perspective, tuning into the here and now, the present moment. Often this is associated with action or athleticism, this part of you. It doesn't have to be. It could also be just about being present and in the effortless flow of life. there's acute applications of this part of you in athleticism and those kinds of things, but there's a whole bunch of things accessible to you here. So what is our proper, as we talk about self-love, looking through extroverted sensing or sensation, what's one way to look at this, Antonia?
So one great thing about this function is that it's associated with aliveness. Like you mentioned, it's tuned into the present moment. It's about experience, and it helps people with ISFP preferences feel alive, which can sometimes, it can sometimes be a bit of a struggle, right? Particularly anybody with IP preferences has a tendency to forget that the outside world's super important, right? And they're sort of just lost in their own experience or whatever that is. This reminds ISFPs that there's a bigger world out there of experiences and enjoyment and intense, moments that just really kick up that feeling of max aliveness.
I think it's just, you get in motion, you start to feel better.
Yes.
I mean, that's really, talk about not giving sound bites. That is a soundbite I'll give to ISFPs.
Yep.
Get up, get moving, and you're going to start to see your life change.
Yep.
Like almost automatically.
Yep, exactly. So when we were talking about introverted feeling or authenticity, the driver function, one of the energies that people have applied to it, particularly John Beebe, is that it's a hero function, right? It's like we are the hero of our stories, and that's the part of us that that feels the most attuned with how we are a hero of our own world. When you get to the second function, this co-pilot, it's, like you mentioned, it's technically the auxiliary. This is more attuned to or associated with parental energy. And that means that we instinctively use it on behalf of other people. That's usually when we find ourselves, having this part instinctively come up. Now, John calls it the axis of relating to others, this co-pilot and 10-year-old or auxiliary and tertiary. And so part of the expectation we should have for ourselves, it should still be a high expectation, just like the driver dominant function needs to be. We need to have high expectations for ourselves. We need to have high expectations for ourselves here too, because this is how we show up for others. This is how we serve. It's the part of ourselves that makes us feel like we're good members of society. And as social creatures, we are almost always rewarded when we do good things for other people, even if they don't necessarily always appreciate it. Like that's the parental energy. The parental energy is to pour into other people, and they may or may never thank you for it, but you feel good for having done it. So a part of really capitalizing on the high expectations we have for this part of ourselves, and for an ISFP in particular, this is extroverted sensing or sensation, when they have high expectations for how they're going to help other people, now they get the benefit of all of the self-love that comes from having contributed and being a contributor. So a big piece of this is modeling to other people what it looks like to be present, to be mindful, to experience the joys of life, to not get so busy and so, in tuned with abstract things or ideas of things or working towards ideas of things, but to actually have like a moment when you're like enjoying the sun and enjoying the grass and enjoying nature around you. And then maybe going and doing something that gets your blood pumping, really being attuned to the aliveness of the moment and then sharing it with others. It can also be a tuning into practical problem solving. Extroverted sensing or sensation oftentimes communicates to people with ISFP preferences that they might be missing skills, like necessary skills in order to solve problems. So it might be also helping people develop skills, helping them go directly towards problems as opposed to constantly talking about them or conceptualizing them, tackle them head on. It might be communicating to other people the importance of health and wellness, taking care of your body as the instrument of all of these experiences. So maybe mentoring others or just modeling for others the importance of taking care of your health and being willing to, to do things that might not be super comfortable, but give you a capacity to enjoy life more fully.
We will be right back. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves. and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity, because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com. Now back to the show. I've seen ISFPs also help other people find their style, their look, their expression, right? The way they show up to the world. Like, let me help you give a makeover, glow up, something like this, where they help the person kind of express themselves more and tune into that. Maybe the person, would love some advice on those kinds of things. So I think we're cataloging some of these things that ISFPs typically do for other people. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're heading toward here is one of the ways and expectations for the self and around self-love for you as an ISFP is to take the sensation that you normally attune to people around style or health or activity and really focus it back onto the self. That spotlight you shine outwardly, now shine your direction. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the switch. Yep. And the expectation is that you'll be doing those things for yourself, which increases your relationship with self, which increases your capacity for self-love.
Yep, exactly. Right. It's the self-parenting aspect, like you mentioned, right? You did say self-parenting, right?
I didn't say that specifically, okay. But that's the concept I gave by tuning this onto the self. And yes, self-parenting instead of just parenting others, parenting the self.
Right. So, and sometimes people with ISFP preferences, like it's so much easier for them to help other people directly tackle problems than it is sometimes for themselves. Like they're not sure what to do about it. They stay a little too, they want to solve the problem in their head first and then enact it, as opposed to jumping into action and making it happen and like sort of intuitively understanding the next right move while they're taking action. And so this idea of being adaptable and responsive and modeling for other people how to roll with the punches and just kind of get it, just get in the flow of life and just kind of figure it out as you go. They can model that for others and help them, get through tough times by, kind of recommending roll with the punches and take care of what you can take care of and directly tackle them and build the skills you need to. But then also whatever you can't do anything about, just kind of, it's like, hey, life is short, right? Accept it, right? Now, when an ISFP does that for themselves, now they're making sure that they're not living a life where days, weeks, months, years are leaving them because they're not being an active participant in their life. Like one of the worst things an ISFP can do is watch too much television or do too much, like throttling of their own experiences, staying at home too much, not getting out, not being active. Like you said, once you get into action, you feel a million times better. So making sure that you have high expectations for your own activity level, high expectations for how much you're getting out and doing things, high expectations for how you're solving problems directly, high expectations for performance, right? Whether that you mentioned athleticism, it can be athleticism, it could be stage performance, or it can just be hiking and getting out there and doing stuff. Think of performance as your best friend and have high expectations so that you feel both that sense of that good sense of having contributed to others, whether you're directly mentoring them or just modeling it, and that feeling that you are doing self-care, right? Self-parenting through this function. That gives you an enormous sense of well-being, that you care enough about yourself that you'll push yourself to go do the things that are good for you.
I think it's a permission issue. A lot of times we feel permission to give to others with this part of ourselves, but sometimes we're like, do I have permission to do this for myself? I almost feel like I'm taking more than I should, or I'm doing something wrong. So like as an ISFP, if you can give yourself permission here to go ahead and turn that toward the self, that's one of the keys to this. Let's talk about now what sits behind that co-pilot.
Yeah.
The 10-year-old, technically called the tertiary cognitive function. What a bunch of big words, but it just means that this is a part of you as an ISFP has about the certainty level of a 10-year-old. Now, 10-year-olds we know have this very interesting experience in the world. They want to learn more and they want to showcase the adults around them that they've got this and that they're learning and they're more competent than they are. They're reaching beyond their pay grade, let's say. They're trying to strive for more. And so what they're looking for is basically the adults in the world to give them validation that they've done a good job, head pats, doing good, great work. And because there's always a striving for that and never knowing the metrics or the measurements that's being applied to you as a person, you don't really know where you stand. You have some uncertainty around this, and you sometimes try too hard from this part of ourselves. All of us do this, not just ISFPs. For an ISFP, if you're listening right now, or you have somebody in your life, this is the perspectives process. That's the nickname, technically called introverted intuition. It's imaginative. It takes up different people's perspectives. If extroverted sensing or sensations about one single perspective, the here and now in this moment, well, perspectives is the opposite of that. It's taking as many perspectives as you can over a timeline from different moments in time and trying to see the pattern among the patterns. This is a significant part of you as an ISFP. This is a part of you probably really appreciate. It's a playful part, probably enjoy maybe things that this can be attuned to or you can learn from this part of yourself. And the expectations, this is one of those that the expectations are all over the place.
Yeah.
You may have too high expectations for yourself here, causing some challenge in self-love, or you don't expect enough for this part of you in certain areas. And that can also challenge self-love.
Yeah. As you're talking about a 10-year-old having too high of expectations and trying to prove to parents, or to adults, certain things, I thought about Piper when she was 10. She was convinced that she was old enough to put herself to bed.
Yeah.
So she kept insisting that we let her put her to bed. And then, so she kind of go through some of the, motions of doing it. And I'd be like, okay, I'll come up and give you a kiss. And she's like, no, do not come up and give me a kiss. I'm putting myself to bed. And then I'd find that she was like still up 45 minutes later. And I'm like, you got to put, like, if you're going to put yourself to bed, you have to put yourself to bed. And she's like, tonight was a weird night. And then she'd get like really defensive and it was an anomaly and I'm not going to believe that she can do it. And then the next night she'd be like, Mom, I'm going to put myself to bed. But pretty soon it was like, kid, you're not ready for this.
Yeah.
You want your kiss, you want your tuck in, like you want your story, like you want the whole thing. Right. But she just tried so hard to prove it.
But to your point, she's in this in between time. She's not a little kid, but she's not old enough yet to do these things on her own. She's trying to make that transition.
And she only knows when she's nailed something by looking up to the adults in her world and seeing their facial expression. Did she do a good job? Are they giving her approval? And this is a great illustration for how our 10-year-old or tertiary function shows up for us. We are not 100% sure how good we are at this. And so there's a proving energy that's associated with it, as you mentioned. And that proving energy means that I think you use the phrase head pats. We're always looking for head pats here. So for somebody with ISFP preferences, there is, this is the first place, this position is the first time we experience real uncertainty. Like we're unlike our driver and co-pilot, that is a place of certainty. And it's such a place of certainty that sometimes we give ourselves a pass when we shouldn't. We're like it's always going to be there for us. And so we sometimes procrastinate doing the right actions because we're like, well, I can do that later. When it comes to this function, we don't feel any of that. We feel very uncertain, just like Piper was trying to compensate for her own uncertainty around whether or not she was ready to be put into bed by insisting that she was and then failing over and over and over again. So the expectation we need to set for our 10-year-old or tertiary function is reasonable for a function that can't seem to shake uncertainty. Like you never quite know if you're doing it right and you're looking to other people for their approval. So this might look like, because introverted intuition or perspectives is looking for meaning, deeper meanings, hidden meanings, patterns of experiences. It's looking for the insight. It's trying to predict things down the road. It's trying to get into other people's heads and figure out what's going on for them and predict what's happening inside somebody else's psychology. There's always going to be an attraction for that for people with ISFP preferences. They're always going to want to be able to do that. The challenge is when they're trying to prove to the outside world that they're good at it without ensuring that they're grounding it in sensory experiences. So this is the other side of that axis of relating to others. So the best way that an ISFP can show up with this is, as opposed to trying to prove to other people that they're good, that they're good at it and they know what they're talking about. And then when they get pushed back at getting defensive, kind of like Piper did, right? She got really defensive when we're like, kid, I don't know if you're ready for this. And she doubled down and she's like, no, I know I am, right? Whether or not she was. And eventually she got much better at it. Eventually she got to a place where she actually could put herself to bed. Still a little bit of bumps here and there, but for the most part, she's figuring it out. But part of the reason why is because we didn't allow her to just keep getting defensive and proving it. We kind of came to the middle. Like we made a compromise. We went, okay, so on the nights that you are successfully putting yourself into bed, we will leave you alone. And the nights when you aren't, then we're going to show up and we're going to start stewarding this experience, right? We're going to start making sure you're going to do it. When an ISFP forms that kind of relationship with their introverted intuition or perspectives, which is, I'm going to let you have a try and we'll see. But if the world gives pushback on the insight, or things around you are going like, I don't know if that's how it works, or maybe you didn't see, you didn't get that down, as opposed to doubling down and getting defensive and trying to have that proving energy and insisting, it's about receiving feedback and finding the compromise. Okay, well, maybe I didn't see something. Maybe I need to go ask the person directly, or maybe I need to go get more information, get more into my sensory experience and pull in information that way. Because I'm much better at observing what's going on than speculating on what's going on. So when we use this part of ourselves, and when an ISFP uses their intuition to support their sensing, because their sensing is their parental energy. That's how they receive self-love, by watching themselves contribute to others. And when they use their intuition to support that, and now that axis of relating to others is now beautifying their relationship with other people, beautifying how they're mentoring, modeling, showing up, then now that part of them feels like they've got a job, right? Yeah. They've got something that they're doing. They don't have to double down and get defensive, because that's not the point. The point isn't being right. The point is to help. The point is to assist the sensing function to see that bigger insight, to see, more information than what their senses can tell them.
Yeah, just like a regular 10-year-old, you wouldn't want them to have too much power and control in life or in your world or your family or anything. You'd want them to be under the proper management of a parent. And what I hear you saying, and just to reflect this back, is that the balance between that parent function, co-pilot of sensation, and the more childlike function of perspectives, that can be balanced in a way that can really show up well for other people and also for the self. Mm-hmm. And this is, when we have that improper balance, it's going to make self-love more accessible to us. Yep. So an ISFP is going to have a hard time loving themselves if this is out of balance, because they're always going to feel like there's a deficiency. There's going to be uncertainty, and, well, I can't show myself love because I got to fix all this other stuff over here. So that it can cause challenge in that.
Right. Or if I have an insight, I'm going to throttle it, because what if somebody disagrees with me? And so that self-doubt might make it so that they're not sharing insights.
Yeah.
Which means that if the world gives pushback, they can't calibrate their insights and they can't get better at it. They can't build skill there. And so exactly, it's like kind of go like, okay, I do not expect this part of me to show up as well as my driver or co-pilot. It's just not going to do that. And it's never going to feel that certain either. So I'm going to beautify my sensing with this. And what happens when you use, in this case, extroverted sensation and introverted intuition perspectives, when you use them in tandem with each other, we've mentioned it in previous episodes that these functions are polarities of each other. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin. And when one side is flipped up, the other one is flipped down. And then when you flip the coin again, whereas before you saw heads and not tails, now you see tails and not heads.
Okay, just so I know what you're saying, or to reflect this to somebody maybe listening or watching, if you're in your co-pilot of sensation, that's the coin that's going to be up. But underneath that, facing down, is perspectives. If you're using perspectives, sensation is going to be flipped down.
Right.
And so you're really accessing either the co-pilot or the 10-year-old at any given time. And it's like flipping the coin to access either side of that in your personality.
Right. Exactly. However, there is a time when you can see both sides of the coin, and that is when it's spinning. So when you got it spinning, you're seeing both heads and tails, but you're seeing them so quick and fast, you almost can't make out which one is which.
Yeah.
And that is when we're using both of our functions in tandem with each other. it's some of the words are like integrating the functions into each other. Carl Jung called it a transcendent function, when they're both working together in tandem so well that you almost can't tell where one ends and the other one begins. That's the ideal. And when you do that, when an ISFP learns how to use their sensing and their intuition in tandem with each other, favoring the sensing side, when they learn how to do that, the function itself almost becomes transcendent. And now you're helping other people. Again, that axis of relating to others. Now you're helping other people in this like whole new way. You can do that through modeling both adaptability and strategy, right? Looking to the future, but also being adaptable while you're doing that. You don't get too locked into a vision. You don't get too locked, because introverted intuition can get really locked into a vision or an insight, or kind of get narrow-minded. Extroverted sensing is not. It's very adaptable. When you use those two functions in tandem, you're both being adaptable and you're seeing a longer timeline or a bigger picture of the implications, and you're seeing a vision, right? But you're adaptable around how you'll get there. And you model that for other people. You model something about like really believing in a future that you want to see, but being open to how it all gets created, not overly attached to like a single way that will happen. You also can communicate creative expression so much more. It's not just art. It's not just doing things. It's art with meaning. It's art that can transfer ideas and bigger ideas to others.
Yeah. So I think what it looks like for an ISFP in reality is, if you're just in your 10-year-old and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this expression. Let's just say you choose something to do. You're going to put on a play or something. I don't know. Like, you just choose anything, or you're going to go be in this sport or something, and you're projecting the future, what that's going to look like. And then you get there and it's not exactly what your future projection was. You probably weren't tuned into that sensation enough to be calibrating along the way what the reasonable reality expectation was. You had more of a fantasy in your head of what that might look like. You could be super disappointed and then start to withhold self-love. Mm-hmm. So by properly saying, as I have these ideas or projections in the future, calibrating to what's real and what I can really verifiably know as I go along, and not just have this big fantasy or abstraction of the future thing, I can now have a proper expectation. And so I'm not going to withhold love when that thing doesn't manifest. Oh, I'm bad. I'm wrong. I couldn't make that happen. Or what's worse is the world's bad and wrong. Nothing's worth anything. And you start to feel negative, and then maybe that also robs you of self-love. Like, either way, that could go badly.
Right. And then you're modeling to other people. If you're too narrow-minded in that intuitive process, you're modeling rigidity and an unwillingness to meet reality halfway.
Yeah.
But if your intuition is now folded into your sensing, it's a desire, it's moving towards a future, it's moving towards a vision, it's understanding a bigger insight, and it's also meeting reality halfway. Now you're really modeling what it looks like to care about something, to be motivated towards something, and to be okay with how it rolls out, to kind of, again, roll with the punches and not be too rigid.
So let's talk about that 3-year-old process, the final one in the car model for ISFPs. It sits behind the driver. Technical name is extroverted thinking. We've nicknamed it effectiveness. This is about getting things done, about resource management, about all those tasks and projects and timelines and calendars. Oh, man. Now, does that mean ISFPs are going to be lacking in the ability to do something in a job or in a formal way or in a getting something done? Absolutely not. There can be a lot of skill built in this part of you as an ISFP. You might work a job that requires you to output, deliver things, create, manage timelines. You might manage other people. Like, it doesn't mean that you have no capacity for this. It just means that your certainty level is going to be about a 3-year-old child's certainty level. It's going to have the certainty of a toddler, not the skill level of a toddler.
Right. Yeah.
And that's important to remember, because we all have to access these parts of ourselves and use these, and your job might have trained you in this well. So you might have capacity here, but I think that it doesn't matter how much skill you've built. It doesn't matter how much your job relies on this. It doesn't matter how much practice or time and attention you put to it. You're going to always feel uncertain about this part of yourself and about your output and about your performance here. And so this, because you feel uncertain, can rob you of the feeling of self-love. And we want to make sure we have this in proper alignment.
Yeah, I like the phrase deep uncertainty, because deep uncertainty usually, like, we love certainty as humans. Anything that feels uncertain to us feels like it's like that's a red flag. If it's uncertain, it's a red flag. So there's 2 different kinds of relationships an ISFP can create with this part of themselves. They can either feel deep uncertainty and push it away and not want to look at it or not want to see it. This could look like I never want to be bound to a clock. I never want to have to punch in, punch out of a job. I never want to have to be organized or, like have my ducks in a row. This can be an attitude around like, why do people think that my value is based on my output and what I can do? So that deep uncertainty can cause an ISFP to really push this function away and not form a healthy relationship with it. And then their expectation for this part of themselves is 0. That's not good because you have way more capacity in this than 0. On the other side, an ISFP can beat themselves up because they're comparing themselves to everybody else. And it seems like everybody else got the memo and they didn't. So why is it so hard for me to like manage my resources? Why is it that I'm living paycheck to paycheck? Why is it that I'm always late or I have a hard time, like managing my time? I get lost in something and all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, it's like 4 hours later and I was supposed to do something else.
And then all of a sudden they say, you know what, I'm going to get a handle on this. And so they sit down maybe in an afternoon and they schedule out their calendar for the next 5 years in great detail of all the things they're going to do to get a handle on this for once and for all. And they make all these spreadsheets and they put a lot of effort in maybe in one afternoon to really do this right and maybe even overdo it and then miss some of those benchmarks or those measurements they set up for themselves and feel bad about it. Like, I failed again.
Yep.
And so it's this throttling, like overdoing it, underdoing it, not knowing if I'm doing it well, just a deep uncertainty. And it can manifest in all sorts of behaviors, like we just mentioned.
Yep.
So you have to triangulate this for what yours is, like what your natural proclivity is as an ISFP. How do we increase self-love, though, in this part of ourselves?
So this is back to the axis of relating to self. And what's challenging about that is extroverted thinking or effectiveness uses outer world metrics to determine whether or not it's accomplishing its goals or it's staying on task. The challenge is that because it goes back to relating to self, it means that you're mostly looking at your own metrics. So you have to be really careful about setting metrics for yourself. If you underdo it, again, our inner wisdom knows when we're letting ourselves off the hook and it feels disappointment. So that's going to be obstruction to receiving self-love. It's like, no, you can do better than 0. But if we have these if we're comparing ourselves to other people and we have these like super high benchmarks and our personal metrics are this and this and this, it's like, it's all of this, like you said, this my 5-year plan, or I'm going to go to bed every night at this time and wake up every morning at this time. And I'm going to da-da-da-da-da. And it's all like super, like almost maybe hyper organized. Then you're going to fail almost immediately. And then you're going to have an obstruction to feeling self-love because you're demoralized now. And the challenge with this one is you can't have other people because it's axis of relating to self. So it's your impression about yourself. You can't have somebody else come and go, no, you did a good job. You did actually pretty good. You should feel good about what you did. It's not like the 10-year-old that's seeking the head pat from other people. It's not looking for other people to give it a cookie and then it gets sated. That's the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old goes, that's right. I was really insightful, wasn't I? The 3-year-old function, it doesn't care. It doesn't care what other adults say. It doesn't care what other people say. It cares about itself and its own metrics. Yeah. So setting reasonable expectations is almost completely parallel with setting reasonable metrics. What are your metrics for yourself? How do you know you've achieved success? What are the kinds of things that you want to accomplish? Are they reasonable? Are they something that what you know about yourself lends itself to being able to accomplish those tasks? Are they arbitrary? Are they in alignment with your interests? Are they in alignment with the things that are important to you and your priorities? If that's not the case, if you're like, I'm just going to prove to myself that I can be rigorously and meticulously organized in all these ways that are not personally interesting to me, that's a recipe for disaster. And so making sure that you are receiving love for yourself here is to not set yourself up for disappointment, not set yourself up for failure. So a big piece of how an ISFP can do this is by, just like the sensing and the intuition in the co-pilot and the 10-year-old were able to create a relationship with themselves, like the coin spinning.
Yeah.
And that created like a transcendent relationship. The driver and the 3-year-old can model that and learn that there is a way for those two functions to also work in tandem with each other, also be like a coin, spinning, become transcendent and influence each other. So the way that it does this, as I mentioned before, is set reasonable expectations, set reasonable goals, making sure you're not losing touch with yourself, right? Like, do you want do you want to accomplish this because it will show everybody else that you can do it? It'll prove to yourself you can. Or are you setting goals and measurements and metrics based on, I want to accomplish that. I think that's important. That's something that is important to me. That's something that's valuable to me and my values and my likes and my interests. So I'm going to set this measurement. I'm going to set this metric based on the fact that I want it, right? Legitimately. I'm not just doing it because other people insinuated that I should. So really having these two functions in tandem with each other means that your actions, it's not like you're going to bifurcate or separate out your identity from the production you do in the world. It's not like I'm so uncertain in my thinking, my extrovert thinking or effectiveness, that anybody that tells me what I should be doing, I'm going to go hop and do that thing, right? Because they told me, because I'm uncertain. I don't know what I should be doing. So I'm going to trust other people. It's going, no, I'm going to trust myself.
Yeah.
I get to set the tone for what I should be doing.
I think what this looks like for an ISFP, in some cases, don't allow yourself to be saved here, and don't allow this to be outsourced to the degree that you don't have any relationship with it. I think the danger for ISFPs, even more than overdoing it or trying to set some external measure, is somebody comes along in your life, is like, I'll just handle this for you. And then you go, great, that's handled. I don't have to think about that. But I think that's going to erode your self-trust and your sense of self. If you don't have any relationship with this part of you and you're completely dependent on someone else for resource or resource management or
setting the tone
or the calendar or schedule or anything that's in the outer world on a outer timeline or, outer production of something, I think you're going to feel bad about yourself if you don't have some relationship to that.
Well, an example of this is I went to go get this degree in college because everybody said that that's what I was supposed to be doing, but I don't care about that.
Yeah.
So now I've outlaid all this money, time, energy, effort on something I never cared about to begin with.
Yeah. And so now, do I even love myself? Do I care about, I made bad choices and I can't be trusted. And again, this is all unconscious in the head, but it's like using that as a way to beat yourself up rather than going, well, that's what I did. And now I need to address that or look at that. And I think that's the real danger for ISFPs, is to have this outsourced, to have it hijacked. And it feels like a relief. It feels like it's being saved. Like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about this thing I hate thinking about, because it's so needed in our world that you have to output in the world to get paid right now. Like, that's just how our economy is set up. It may frustrate you as an ISFP, but that's just the reality. And so because that's the reality, it could be easy to go, oh, well, somebody wants to take it off my plate. Great. I'm sure a dream for an ISFP is a universal basic income. No one has to work. That would be amazing. But that just saves this resource part, from having to think about how it's going to engage with the world. And I bet you, if that happened, you'd actually feel horrible over time.
Yeah.
You'd have a hard time showing self-love because the relationship with self would be bifurcated. It wouldn't be yours. You wouldn't be generating the resource.
Right.
And there's something about doing something for yourself as an ISFP that I think gives you a sense of satisfaction. I did that. That was my expression. That was my resource I earned.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a business person. You're not going to be at the top of a C-suite executive suite necessarily. But having some relationship with that, I think, is really, really important for the self-love access.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be money. It can just be that I accomplished my goals.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? It's like...
money's an easy way to see it.
It's an easy way to see it, but it's like, no, I did what I wanted to do and I accomplished it on time, right? I set a project up, like you mentioned before, you put on a play. And it was ready by the time that everybody was in the audience in the seats.
Yeah.
That's awesome, right? I did that. I accomplished that. So like you said, anything that saves you from that ability to accomplish is going to erode your ability to receive love from yourself. The other thing that integrating this part and having reasonable expectations for it is being willing to receive critical feedback. Sometimes it's very difficult for ISFPs to receive other people's feedback and to experience it objectively. It almost always feels like a direct attack. Right? Or it can feel that way. And when introverted feeling or authenticity integrates extroverted thinking or effectiveness, that feeling and thinking balance allows the introspection of feeling to be, or the sensitivity of introspection to be mitigated a little bit by an ability to take an objective stance. Like, maybe this person gave me feedback not because they were trying to stab me, right? Like they weren't trying to hurt my feelings. Maybe there's something here I need to listen to. And okay, I can take that feedback. I can think about that. And then I can kick it up to my feeling function and go, what do you think? And if the feeling function has already dealt with the ability to not be overwhelmed by emotions, like overwhelmed by a trigger or overwhelmed by, taking personal offense or being righteous about it, if they're able to get to the other side of maybe even that initial feeling, because almost all of us have that initial feeling when we get critical feedback, right? We want to defend ourselves. They don't understand what our intentions were, yada, yada, yada. But if you can kind of calm that part of you down, and if the ISFP can calm the feeling part that might want to defend itself, and then it can go, okay, well, I'm not overwhelmed by this. I can actually see a lot of aspects of myself, and maybe they did give me some critical feedback that I needed to hear. Maybe I did need to receive that. And then now this can be part of setting the tone, right? That feedback was actually good. I did need to hear that. Yeah, now I need to probably get to work on that. I could see how I need to make that part of how, as I change and grow over time, I'm gonna infuse part of that into it, right? I'm gonna infuse the parts of it that I resonate with. I get that. That's probably something I should be doing something about.
Yeah.
And now you've got somebody who's on a personal growth mission. So that thinking function, don't have the expectations that, that you're going to single-handedly, steward a whole project around industrial engineering. That might not be your fate, but you can get a job, land a job, be in a position of leadership, be a very empathetic, leader. You can delegate, you can, keep a time clock, you can make projects happen, you can get things done. And you probably are not that interested in single-handedly running an industrial engineering project anyway. Like that's probably not something you would want anyway. So as long as you're doing things that are in alignment with what you want, the things that you're interested in, what you're good at, and what gives you self-confidence, then you have everything you need to be able to meet the metrics that you've set for yourself. You have everything you need to have to meet those reasonable goals, and to not let yourself off the hook, as we were talking about, and not beat yourself up if you're not like the nth degree of this.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about expectations before I tune us to learning from this type?
No, just make sure that you keep your finger on the pulse of doing enough for your inner wisdom to be proud of you, while simultaneously not feeling demoralized when failure hits, because failure is a part of life and everybody fails. So make sure that when you do hit a fail point with particularly your 10-year-old and your 3-year-old functions, that you don't you don't take that as some sort of commentary on your character. Yeah. You're not a bad person, right? Like you're not a bad person because these are uncertain parts of you. You're just a person having a human experience, which you well know. So allow yourself to fail and allow yourself to not take that too personally.
Let's talk about what the rest of us can learn from ISFPs showing themselves love. So the other 15 types, listening along or watching along as we talk about the ISFP showing self-love, proper expectations for their car model of functions, how their functions are laid out of authenticity, sensation, perspectives, and effectiveness in that order, your driver, co-pilot, 10-year-old, 3-year-old. We talked about on a different episode, earlier episode, about the ESFP personality, and we tuned into this idea. So ISFPs and ESFPs are very similar. They have all the same cognitive functions, just a little bit different order. One is extroverted, one's introverted in their personality and showing up. And we talked about how resilient ESFPs are. And I think that applies to ISFPs as well. I think there's a resilience. I think it really comes from the co-pilot for ISFPs, the co-pilot process of extroverted sensing or sensation. There's a sense of just meeting the world as it is in the way it is, in a real way, in the present moment. And I think it's a reality. It's like a realism that comes from this part of the ISFP, this co-pilot, or technically the auxiliary part. I think that realism really allows you to meet the world, straight at it, like right on. And then the other part of you, that introverted feeling or authenticity part, allows you to make those experiences your own. And you have a lot of ability to make meaning from those, very personal meaning. And because you have so much ability to make personal meaning from that, as an ISFP, it would follow then that you are not rattled or frustrated by things in the world as much, because you can interpret them in the way you need to interpret them to make them make sense for you and to be able to move through them. So you're meeting reality where it's at, and then you're able to interpret things based on your own sense of self, your own sovereign sense of who you are. Mm-hmm. I think this, again, everything in proper balance and an ISFP performing through the world well, I think this is a pretty empowered and empowerful stance to come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say that the number one thing that I learned from ISFPs that are very well developed is a combination of the two things you just mentioned. I would call it resilient self-improvement.
Yeah.
Right. That's the resilience of meeting reality where it's at and being flexible, right? Combined with, once you get all of those functions in balance and in order, well, you're able to receive feedback. In fact, an ISFP that is at their best is seeking feedback so they can implement it.
Yeah.
They are being both adaptable, but they're also got a plan for themselves, right? And that they're using what they know about themselves to continue to improve. They're balancing patience with action. So the intuition allows them to be a little bit more patient because they know that progress happens slowly over time. But as they're making that progress over time, their extroverted thinking or effectiveness reminds them that progress is slow and that you should celebrate benchmarks.
Yeah.
So they also are smart enough to celebrate benchmarks of improvement over time. So they're patient, action-oriented, flexible. They have a hope for the future. They have a path that they're walking. They're looking for feedback. They're implementing it. And when they go inside and do that introspection, they have an honest self-assessment. Right?
Yeah.
They're not in a fantasy about who they are. They're testing their mettle all the time, so they know who they are. They're not just going, well, I could do that. They go, I tried that. I didn't do it yet, but I'm improving on the way to being able to do it. So that, I think, is when an ISFP is really well balanced. I think that they are an excellent model to all other 15 types of that resilient, progressive self-improvement.
And the hardest part about that for an ISFP is that every change, every growth, every movement, every new learning, every becoming more than what they were, they're so tuned in with the authenticity part of them, that driver of who they are. Every time you change, you become somebody new. And that can be deeply painful. That can hurt and cause like a little bit of scarring. Like, well, I had to change and alter who I was to be different.
Little mini ego deaths.
Yeah. And so they can, over time, build a resilience to these little ego deaths.
Yep.
That there's these tiny little humiliations we feel when we upgrade or we change something.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of feel a little silly and stupid for doing it. Like, how come I didn't learn that before? Why wasn't I better already?
Mm-hmm.
We have all this self-talk. But an ISFP that models this and just does it and stays with it, confronting reality and then upgrading their identity as they change and grow, all of us can look to that person. We could look to you as an ISFP and say, that's how you do it. That's how you stay strong in the midst of having to confront who you were at that moment, making a change and now confronting the new version of you.
Accepting and loving every iteration.
Yeah. And so I think that's really what we can learn, this idea of resilience. About the self-improvement. Well, self-improvement for an ISFP definitely understands and feels the weight of that authenticity identity shift. And again, I think that's something that we can all learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're an ISFP or you have an ISFP in your life, we want to hear from you. What's coming up as we talk about this today? Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, share your story about self-love. The idea is to find an access point for self-love, find how we can show ourselves love. And if you're an ISFP, we want you to have this expectation, proper expectation based on your personality of all the different functions you use cognitively. What can you expect of them? What is the proper placement for those to have a good relationship with yourself that you can send that love on those channels of relationing to yourself? So come over to personalhacker.com directly below this episode. Make your voice heard.
Yeah. I hope I was cogent enough. I'm definitely... feeling the headache getting pretty strong. So I'm like, I probably was more rambly than usual.
Well, you just go deeper and you talk more. I think,
know.
when your
I'm
head
so
hurts.
sorry.
So,
and the ISFPs are like, why was it my episode?
Yeah, the ISFPs are already complaining. It's too long for us. The ISFPs are like, oh, dear Lord, this is like a 5-hour episode.
I know. So my apologies if this goes super long. I'm probably going to be horrified when I find out how long it actually was.
Maybe.
But if you made it this far, thanks for hanging. I appreciate it. Maybe the next time I won't be as afflicted. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and lots of other platforms, Android platforms. And if you leave us a rating and a review on iTunes, I read all of them and I really appreciate them. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube. We have a video podcast, so you might be watching us right now. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for future episodes. And we mentioned the owner's manual for ISFPs that helps walk through your car model. If this all felt if this felt right, meaning that it's like, this feels good. It feels good to understand my cognition on this level. It feels good to understand it in a way that can help me become a better, the best version of myself. While, as mentioned, accepting and loving every iteration. We highly recommend picking up a copy of the Owner's Manual. It's a deep dive into your cognition and all the phenomena that follow it. We talk about cognitive function loops and grips and the various kinds of them. We talk about fixation that you might have as an ISFP. We talk about how to get into your flow state, common challenges. So check out the Owner's Manual. I highly, highly recommend it. You can find that at personalityhacker.com.
Yeah, it teaches you how to give yourself permission to be who you are, but don't just stop there. Actually put some things into the world and grow yourself. Yeah. There's more capacity than you know. You have more superpowers than you realize. That's really what the Owner's Manual wants to do, is tune you into who you are right now and then show you all the superpowers available to you. I think it's a great place to start for any personality type, but specifically ISFP, because we're talking about you today. Again, come over to personalityhacker.com, make your voice heard. And my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the Owner's Manual for your personality type. In this Owner's Manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity, because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your Owner's Manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your Owner's Manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.